Have you noticed how life seems to accelerate after 40? But does fear also grow? Fear of losing money, fear of ill health, fear of not enjoying life. And here's something that might sound absurd. Fear isn't real. You manufacture it. Yes, you create the enemy that paralyzes your dreams. What if I told you there's a forbidden method to turn this game around in seconds? Fear has never been the true enemy. What truly paralyzes people is ignorance. Fear is merely an effect, a symptom. The cause lies in not knowing. Think about it. How many times have you hesitated to take a step that could transform your life simply because you didn't understand what would happen next? How many opportunities have you let slip by because you weren't sure you could handle the risks? That wasn't fear itself. It was ignorance taking control of your mind. When you don't understand something, your mind starts fabricating negative images. You imagine bankruptcy before even starting a business. You imagine rejection before expressing your feelings. You imagine loss before investing. And what happens? You become paralyzed, as if standing before an abyss. But that abyss doesn't exist. It's merely a creation of your mind's lack of understanding. I've been exactly there. When I worked for the Toronto Fire Department, I had an illusory sense of security. It was a stable job. Nobody got fired. But I had a dream within me. Something called me to something greater. Still, I was afraid to leave. Afraid of not being able to support myself. Afraid of being seen as a failure. In reality, it wasn't the job that held me back. It was ignorance about how I could create something better. When I finally sat down with a mentor and began to understand how the mind works, I realized that what I called fear was simply a lack of clarity. And that's what happens to thousands of people after 40. They accumulate responsibilities, children, bills, commitments. They feel they can no longer take risks, that a mistake could cost too much. But the root of this fear isn't age, nor obligations. It's the lack of knowledge about how to create a new reality from what they already possess. It's the lack of understanding of the power of their own minds that chains them. Science confirms this. Research shows that a large percentage of people don't make important decisions because they can't predict the outcome, even when the objective chances of success are high. This is the so-called uncertainty aversion bias. The brain prefers known discomfort to facing something new that could bring a much greater reward. In other words, most people choose to remain trapped in a limited life simply because they don't understand how to deal with the unknown. But the unknown isn't your enemy. It's the gateway to growth. And the more you understand how the mind works, the more you realize that ignorance and fear are two sides of the same coin. You don't eliminate fear by confronting it head-on. You dissolve it by acquiring knowledge, expanding your vision, and replacing images of failure with images of victory. Think of the number of brilliant people you know, people who have talent, intelligence, and even education, but who are trapped in jobs they hate or in relationships that don't make them happy. This happens because, even with information, they haven't transformed that information into understanding. Information is just data, but understanding is power. Ignorance fuels fear, while applied knowledge generates confidence. So the question you should ask yourself isn't, how do I eliminate fear from my life? The real question is, what ignorance am I still allowing to dictate my decisions? Because the moment you replace ignorance with understanding, fear loses the ground on which it stands. There's a silent cycle that destroys the lives of millions of people, especially after 40, when responsibilities increase and commitments seem to multiply. Few people realize it, but this cycle begins almost imperceptibly with something that seems harmless: worry. You worry about bills, retirement, health, your children. This worry, when repeated every day, makes way for anxiety. The body begins to react. Your heart races at random moments. You lose sleep. You feel a knot in your stomach, and it all seems inexplicable. But the explanation is clear. The mind is imprinting on the body the effects of what you've chosen to feed it. Anxiety, if not understood and transformed, soon turns into something heavier: depression. This is when a person sees no way out, feels as if they've lost control and shuts themselves off. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens because every unresolved worry was stored, compressed, hidden in the subconscious until it becomes an unbearable weight. And this weight, over time, destroys the physical body. Medicine already recognizes the link between chronic stress, anxiety, and serious illnesses like hypertension, heart attacks, and even cancer. That's why I say that fear is not just an emotion, but a poison that slowly corrodes the vitality of those who feed it. After 40, this cycle is even more dangerous. Many people believe they can no longer make mistakes, that they don't have time to start over. So they worry more, try to control everything, and forget that the more they feed fear, the more energy they give to this destructive cycle. Have you noticed how people who seem to be always tense and worried end up getting sick more often? It's no coincidence. It's the law of cause and effect acting mercilessly. I've seen this happen before my very eyes. I knew colleagues in the fire department who lived worried about the future but never did anything to change. They remained in jobs they hated, simply out of fear of instability. Over time, I saw some of them develop serious health problems. It wasn't the hard work that destroyed them. It was the cycle of worry, anxiety, and depression. They were trapped in a mental system that slowly transformed each negative thought into physical deterioration. And here's the cruelest part. This process is almost invisible. Those who live within it think they're just being responsible, realistic, or cautious. But in reality, they're letting worry become anxiety, anxiety become depression, and depression become illness. It's a downward path that can only be interrupted by those who choose to understand how the mind really works. Fear isn't just emotional discomfort, it's a chain of predictable events. And when you understand this cycle, you have the power to interrupt it. The secret lies in recognizing that worry doesn't have to be the beginning of the fall. It can be the turning point. The moment you choose to replace worry with understanding, anxiety has no way of taking hold. It's a daily choice, but it's a choice that can save your life. Within you lies a power so great that most people spend their entire lives without discovering it. The mind is like a vast computer that never shuts down, constantly receiving energy. This energy flows all the time, 24 hours a day, without ceasing. The conscious part of the mind has the power to choose, to create images, to analyze situations. But the subconscious, on the other hand, doesn't make distinctions, doesn't judge, doesn't reject anything. It simply accepts everything you send it, whether positive or negative, and transforms it into visible results in your life. That's where many people get lost, especially after 40, because they've become accustomed to feeding the subconscious with images of fear, worry, and limitation. It's as if, without realizing it, they've programmed faulty software to run in the background. Have you noticed that some people have all the necessary knowledge, have studied, have dedicated themselves, but live with mediocre results? And at the same time, others, with little formal education, manage to prosper. The difference lies in what each of them allows to enter and remain in their minds. The subconscious is like a fertile garden. If you plant seeds of doubt, worry, and failure, what will grow are fruits of anxiety, blockage, and scarcity. But if you plant images of victory, abundance, and confidence, the result will be totally different. The problem is that after years of repeating the same patterns, most people have created mental habits that work on autopilot. They're used to turning on the television and receiving a bombardment of bad news, to talking to colleagues who complain about life, to constantly reviewing bills to pay. And all this goes straight to the subconscious, shaping their reality without them realizing it. I lived this experience firsthand. When I started studying the workings of the mind, I realized that, for years, I had been giving my energy to limiting thoughts. I worked hard, but I didn't prosper. I made plans, but I always felt trapped. Only when I understood that my conscious mind had the power to choose which images to send to the subconscious, did everything change. I discovered that I could build new beliefs, new ideas, and new habits, and this would completely transform my results. This power is within each person. It's as if you had the remote control of your own life in your hands, but you spent all your time believing that the programming is being chosen by someone else. Fear sets in precisely when you don't take control, when you let external stimuli determine your internal thoughts. And the reality is that, after 40, this habit can be so ingrained that it seems impossible to change. But it's not. Change begins the moment you consciously decide to accept only thoughts that strengthen, expand, and build you. Imagine someone who repeats daily that making money is hard, the economy is in crisis, and trying is futile. Their subconscious absorbs these statements as absolute truths, and their life reflects this programming. Now, imagine someone else facing the same circumstances, choosing to repeat that they always find opportunities, can thrive in any situation, and deserve abundance. Their subconscious will also accept these statements, and their reality will differ. The external scenario might be identical, but the internal world dictates the outcome. That's why some people seem to carry a different aura, a sparkle in their eyes, an energy that attracts good things. It's not luck, it's mental programming. It's a reflection of how they've learned to harness the hidden power within their minds. This power is available to everyone, including you, right now. What I call the forbidden method isn't magic. It's a simple, straightforward, and entirely applicable process that transforms fear into faith. First point, fear often doesn't exist outside your head. It's created by poorly formed mental images and information gaps, ignorance. When you identify this, everything starts to change. Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? Is it losing my retirement savings? Is it the risk of starting a business at 45, 50, 60 years old? Is it the fear of humiliation, failure, disappointing my family? By naming the fear, you begin to shed light on it, and light is the enemy of the monster. This idea that fear is an effect and ignorance is the cause is central to my teachings. The second step of the method is factual and anti-romantic. Investigate. Don't dwell on catastrophic scenarios. Ask helpful questions. What data am I missing? How much do I really need to live on? What are my options for supplemental income? What minimum steps can I take today that don't require a leap of faith? When I sat with my mentor, I didn't ask for courage. I asked for information, understanding, a roadmap. Understanding transforms fear into curiosity, and curiosity pushes you to action. The transformative question I use, and you should too, is, what ignorance is sustaining this fear? Once you answer, spend 30 minutes seeking only that information. Notice how fear instantly diminishes in practice. The third pillar is applied visualization, not as empty fantasy, but as practical subconscious programming. Your subconscious mind accepts images as commands. It doesn't distinguish between real and vividly imagined. Therefore, I ask you to construct a clear mental movie with a beginning, middle, and end, where you already live the desired outcome. See the complete scene, where you are, who's with you, the smells and sounds. Engage your emotions. Feel relief, pride, peace. Psychological research shows that mentally rehearsing a skill improves real-world performance. Meta-analytic evidence on mental practice and performance demonstrates real effects when visualization is well structured. Let me give you an example that often warms people's hearts. Jim Carrey, when he was a struggling young actor, wrote himself a check for $10 million, dated it for the future, and carried it in his pocket as a reminder of what he was claiming as real. Years later, he received precisely that amount for a single job. I'm not saying it was magic. I'm saying it was clear intention, plus imagery, plus action. The image served as a focal point that kept him in a mental state of possibility, and life responded. But visualization alone becomes fantasy without understanding and action. So the fourth step is what I call experimental proof. Create micro-experiments. If the fear is financial, conduct a small, reversible test. Invest an amount you can lose without going bankrupt. Offer a minimal service. Ask a client for feedback. Open an automatic savings account of 1% of your salary. This does two essential things. 1. It erodes the catastrophic image by showing you can act without collapsing. 2. It provides feedback that replaces ignorance with data. Faith that produces results is always based on understanding and evidence. In my journey, I learned to do this. Small steps, informed decisions, recording the results, and the results fuel faith. The 5th step is programming the subconscious with conscious repetition. Short affirmations are worthless if you don't anchor them in images and emotions and congruent actions. Create a 5-minute mental movie every morning, a 2-minute affirmation script at midday, and a small action before the end of the day that proves the new belief. Repetition plus emotion, impression. And when you imprint a new image on the subconscious part, your posture changes, your gaze changes, your conversations change, and doors begin to appear. There's a real warning. If you let fear govern your financial decisions, the consequences are measurable and devastating. Investors who sell at the first drop, driven by panic, often miss most of the market's recovery. Studies on investor behavior show that the tendency to sell in moments of panic and buy impulsively after price increases erodes real returns. In other words, the same fear that protects can ruin your financial future if it's not understood and managed. You might think this sounds too spiritual, but there's a biological basis too. Chronic worry and anxiety aren't harmless. They alter your body and increase the risk of heart problems and other diseases. Science correlates chronic stress with adverse cardiovascular reactions. Therefore, dealing with fear isn't just about gaining money or courage. It's about preserving your health. Understanding and transforming fear into faith is, literally, an investment in your longevity. Now, I'll be specific about daily habits I recommend. 1. Every morning, 3 minutes of deep breathing plus 5 minutes of a mental movie where you see and feel your new reality. 2. A list of a single investigative question per day. What data am I missing? Who can explain this to me? 3. A 10-minute micro-action experiment. Calling a contact, sending a simple proposal, opening a spreadsheet. 4. A 60-second results journal at the end of the day, noting what worked and why. 5. Repeating 30-second affirmations before bed describing the result already achieved. These elements, repeated for 30 days, erode limiting beliefs, create evidence, and transform fear into grounded faith. There's evidence that this type of psychological attitude weighs heavily in real life. Studies show that optimistic individuals are more likely to age better and live longer, not by luck, but by different behaviors, resilience, and decisions. Transforming your mental attitude isn't escaping reality, it's engineering results. I now want to share an episode from my life that illustrates all this without glamour. When I was young, I had an accident with a saw that injured my thumb, and for a while, it seemed like my life was limited. I left technical school, found myself working in jobs I called idiotic, without direction. The physical injury was real, but what affected me most was the feeling of helplessness, the thought that my future was decided. What broke that chain wasn't abstract motivation. It was study, a systematic understanding of how the mind works, repeated visualizations, and micro-actions that proved to me that I could create results, and that evidence gave me faith. It wasn't fast, but it was certain. Understanding replaced fear, faith guided action, and action brought concrete results. This is the same sequence that anyone over 40 can follow, regardless of age, responsibilities, or how much life has hurt. To recap in practice, identify the ignorance that sustains your fear. Seek information. Build a clear mental movie. Execute micro-experiments to gather evidence. Repeat and emotionally anchor the new belief. Monitor and adjust. And whenever you feel the old pattern resurfacing, break the circuit. Stand up, move your body, change your environment for a minute, count to 20, and resume with the investigative question. Small interventions interrupt automatic cycles. If you do this for 30 days honestly, questioning, studying, visualizing, and acting, I guarantee that something within you will shift. It's not a mystical promise. It's a process based on understanding, evidence, and repetition. If you wish, tomorrow I'll show practical exercises for each part of this method. Visualization scripts, ready-made investigative questions, and a micro-experiment protocol that can be used by anyone with responsibilities over 40. There was a time in my life when everything seemed to have ended before it even began. I was 26 years old and completely lost. I left school without a solid education, bouncing from one job to another. I changed tires at gas stations, worked in factories, did every kind of work that came my way. Nothing seemed to have direction. Nothing seemed to have purpose. I was in debt, had no prospects, and to be honest, I didn't even have hope that anything could change. And that's precisely why I speak so clearly about fear. I know its taste because I once lived daily under its weight. It was in this scenario that a book fell into my hands, Think and Grow Rich. I didn't have a reading habit. I didn't have discipline. I didn't have a culture of study. But something in that book captivated me. I didn't understand everything, but I understood enough to realize that the problem wasn't the world. It wasn't the lack of opportunities. It wasn't the government or the economy. The problem was the way I was programmed to think. It hit me so hard, so deeply, that I decided to start studying every day, even if it was just for a little while, even if I didn't understand everything immediately. In just 1 year, that decision completely changed the course of my life. My income jumped from a little over $4,000 to over $100,000. And no, it wasn't because I won the lottery. It wasn't because someone gave me an inheritance. It wasn't because I found some secret shortcut. It was because I started replacing ignorance with understanding, fear with applied faith, paralysis with conscious action. I discovered that I didn't have to live a prisoner of the reality I had created myself. I could create a new reality, and I did. This result didn't happen because the world changed in my favor. The economy remained the same. The problems were still out there. What changed was how I reacted to them, how I used my mind. I stopped feeding myself with defeatist thoughts and started nourishing my mind with images of prosperity, success, and possibilities. Fear kept trying to show up, but every time it did, I already had a weapon: knowledge, understanding, study. And this is important for you to understand. It doesn't matter how old you are now, whether you're over 40, 50, or even 60. The change you're looking for isn't in the youth that's already gone. It's not in luck. It's not in someone opening a door for you. It's within you, in how you choose to think and act from today forward. If I, with no formal education, no experience, no resources, managed to completely transform my life in a short period of time, you can too. What this episode of my life proves is that fear only has power until the moment you decide to replace it with understanding. Fear told me I was incapable, that I was condemned to a limited life. Understanding showed me that I could learn, grow, and prosper. And that's why I state with such conviction, what seems impossible to you now can become absolutely real when you begin to change the images you hold in your mind and start acting towards them. This story isn't just about money. It's about breaking invisible chains. It's about waking up one day and realizing that what's holding you back isn't a lack of opportunities, but a lack of vision about what you already possess. Fear kept me in a vicious cycle of poverty and frustration. Understanding put me on a path of prosperity, and that path is open to anyone who decides to follow it. If there's one thing you should take away from this account, it's this. Life doesn't change when fear disappears. It changes when you decide to walk even with fear, armed with understanding. That's how my life transformed, and that's how yours can transform too. The most important point you need to take away from this is simple. Fear was never the problem. It was always just a symptom of a lack of understanding. The instant you exchange ignorance for understanding, fear dissolves and gives way to confidence, clarity, and action. And that's exactly what will open the doors to everything you wish to experience from now on. Continue right now, because the next video is already appearing on your screen, and in it, you will climb another step in your evolution of wisdom, becoming 1% better than you are now. Thank you very much for being here with me, and I'll see you in the next video.